All right. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our second of 3 public scoping meetings for the Sepulveda Transit Corridor. We're now going to get started. Looks like we have around 100 and just short of 110 people in the Zoom room with us this evening. And thank you for joining us. Today, we're going to learn a little bit more about what we've been studying for the Sepulveda Transit Corridor project. You're joining us just at the start of our environmental review process. We're in what's called public scoping, which is the very start of our multi-year environmental review process. And so we're going to go over a couple of housekeeping items first as we start today's meeting, as well as one general Metro announcement, followed by our agenda, some introductions, and then we're going to kick right into our formal presentation and have plenty of opportunity for public comments towards the end of our presentation today. Next slide. So first things first, for those that are joining us today, we do have Spanish interpretation available for today's meeting via Zoom. So for those that would prefer to listen to today's meeting in Spanish using Spanish audio, we ask that you click on the interpretation icon on your menu and select Spanish as your preferred audio. And we have our interpreter, Elizabeth Orozco, who will be interpreting for us in Spanish today. I will now, we will also be posting the presentation for today in Spanish, the Spanish translated presentation in the chat momentarily as well for those that wish to view it. Next, I will have Ben, who's with our outreach team, provide that same announcement in Spanish. Ben.
Buenas noches. Interpretación en español será proporcionada por Zoom. Haga clic en el icono Interpretación. Escoja la opción para escuchar en español. El enlace de la presentación en español estará disponible en el chat.
Great, thank you so much, Ben. We also have a couple of additional housekeeping items. As for our webinar today, it is being recorded. However, your attendee cameras are off as we are in a webinar, and your microphones are currently muted at this time being. When we get to oral comments, you will have an opportunity to unmute your mic and provide oral comments. And during that particular section of the meeting, we'll provide further instructions on how to provide oral comments. And that'll be after our formal presentation today. If you have any technical questions or things of that sort, the Q&A option is open to you. However, do note that we are not answering any questions in the Q&A function. We also want to offer the opportunity for anybody that would like to introduce themselves from any elected official offices, neighborhood councils, homeowner associations, or any of our local agencies, agency representatives that would like to introduce themselves. So please use the Q&A function to do that, and we will introduce you shortly. Additionally, for any technical support, if you're having any issues with the Zoom platform or any of the Zoom functions, we do have staff that's available to help you, and you can do so by calling or texting our support line, which is at 213-600-9039. Next slide. Metro also has a code of conduct for our public meetings, and we want to ensure that all participants can fairly and clearly share their ideas, comments, and concerns about the Sepulveda Transit Corridor project. And we're asking for your help in providing a safe and equitable process for tonight's meeting. And so a couple of reminders for tonight's meeting as we're moving along. We ask that you, one, respect the format of today's meeting and allow everyone an opportunity to provide their public comments. While you are providing your public comment, when you have the opportunity to do so, we ask that you turn off any cell phones and or any background noise while you're speaking. We do have a court reporter who is with us, Laura, who will be recording and documenting all of our oral public comments that are received, and those will be put into our formal scoping record. We also ask that you treat fellow community members, agency representatives, Metro staff, and others with respect during today's meeting. And while addressing any of your comments, we ask that you address them towards Metro staff and consultants and not towards any other attendees in today's meeting. And the last thing that we ask is that you maintain a conversational tone as we move this study forward for today's meeting. Next slide. We also have a general Metro announcement as well too. For those that may have been kept up on Metro News, Yesterday, Metro resumed bus fares as well as front door boarding on our system. With the restarting of bus fares, Metro is encouraging riders to take advantage of our fare discounts as well as fare programs as we move forward into collecting bus fares once again. With that, we do have our Life program, which currently has discounts for the next 6 months, which are currently half off. And we have also unveiled a new online application program, both in English and Spanish for our Life program. And also for those that do register, our new registrants of our new Life program, they're also able to get 90 free days of free rides as well too. So this is a great opportunity to sign up for that program. And for more information about our Life program, we have the link on the screen here. It's www.metro.net/writing/life. And that will also be posted in the chat for those that are wanting to learn more about that program. Additionally, Metro bus fare passes are also discounted through the first 6 months, first half of 2022. And with that, that includes our daily, weekly, and monthly passes, all at half price. Next slide. So for today's agenda, we have a couple of things to go over today. First, we'll start off with our welcome and introductions. We just finished our housekeeping items, but we'll introduce the team to you today. And following that, we'll go over our project video, which will bring us up to date on what's been done on the project so far. And then we'll go into our formal scoping presentation. At around 7 o'clock, once our presentation is over, we'll then move into the public scoping comment session, where you'll have an opportunity to provide oral comments during today's meeting. And then as we wrap up at around just before 8 o'clock, we'll go over next steps for the project. And during today's meeting, we recognize that there are many of you in attendance today. So far, it looks like we have around 141, so that number's risen in the last few minutes. But we'll try to accommodate as many comments as possible based on the allotted amount of time. And we are also offering multiple alternative ways to provide comments other than providing oral comments that are available all the way through to the end of our scoping period, which ends on Friday, February 11th of this year. Next slide. Now I'd like to introduce today's speakers. We'll start off with David Meeker, Executive Officer with Countywide Planning and Development. Next, we have Peter Carter, Project Manager for our environmental process with Countywide Planning and Development. Next, we have Jackie Sue, Senior Transportation Planner with Countywide Planning and Development. Next, we have Kavita Mehta, Project Manager, she's waving hello, for our pre-development agreements, and she's with our Program Management Department. And then we have our Community Relations team, which is currently led by Jody Litvack, Senior Director with Countywide Planning and Development, and myself, Matthew Marquez, Community Relations Officer with Community Relations. Next slide. And before we get started and launch into our video, we have a couple of questions that we always ask during our public meetings here. We're going to ask you 2 quick questions on a Zoom poll. We want to know where everyone is coming from today. We'd like to know what area you're joining us from during today's meeting. Are you from the Valley, the West Side, maybe downtown, South LA, or the Gateway cities, maybe from the San Gabriel Valley, South Bay, North County areas, or are you coming from outside of LA County viewing in today? We'd like to know where you're coming from. And then we have our second question, which will go to the next slide. Excellent. And we always like to know if this is your first time interacting with our project. So have you previously participated on the project? Have you attended a meeting before for this project, or have you submitted a comment potentially for this project before? And so we'd like to know how you participated, or if this is your first time attending a Sepulveda Transit Corridor meeting. So please go ahead and submit your polls really quickly, and we'll give everyone a minute or two to provide their responses. Hey, Stevie, how are we looking so far?
Like we're around 75%.
Okay, we'll give everybody about 15 more seconds and then we'll close the poll. Okay, thank you all for participating in that. Let's go ahead and close the poll, and we'll go ahead and release the results really quickly. Excellent. So it looks like we have a split between 3 different groups. So as expected, we have around an even split, 26 and 27% between the San Fernando Valley and the West Side. We also have about 22% of you coming from outside of LA County. So thank you for joining us and for your interest in this project. We also have about 12% coming from the Central LA and downtown LA area, downtown area. So we thank you for joining us. And it looks like the remainder of you are coming from different areas from all over LA County. So we thank you for joining us tonight. And let's go ahead and go to the second question. It also looks like we have a pretty even split between people that have attended a meeting before and those that are participating for the first time. So about 61 of you have attended before, and 55 of you that participated in the poll are participating for the first time. So we welcome you and thank you for joining us at this very first step of our environmental process. And we look forward to continuing to engage you as we move along and develop this project. And just as a reminder, for those that are representing elected official groups, homeowners associations, neighborhood councils, local agency representatives, we ask that you introduce yourself using the Q&A function, and we'll be providing introductions very shortly. Now, we're going to turn it over to our project video, which you may have seen. We're going to go ahead and play that for everybody to catch everyone up to speed on what we've been doing on the project.
Traveling between the Valley and the West Side isn't easy or fast, and traffic will only get worse over time.
Metro has a plan to make it easier to get around. The natural barrier created by the Santa Monica Mountains makes this area complex and challenging, and will require innovation and multiple solutions. Metro is studying several projects in this area, including a new rail line with the Sepulveda Transit Corridor.
The Sepulveda Transit Corridor project can provide reliable, high-capacity public transportation to provide an alternative to traffic and help take cars off the road.
Before we get into the latest updates on this project, let's quickly catch up on our progress to date.
Metro completed a feasibility study in December 2019. The study looked at potential alternatives for traveling between the San Fernando Valley and LAX.
In our extensive outreach for this study, we received more than 1,200 public comments.
All of this public feedback and our technical analysis from the feasibility study has informed the range of proposed alternatives being advanced for environmental review.
In March 2021, the Metro Board approved pre-development agreements with LA Skyrail Express and Sepulveda Transit Corridor partners to pursue a potential public-private partnership to accelerate delivery of the Valley to West Side section of this project.
The pre-development agreements, or PDAs, bring in teams that include designers, construction contractors, and financial partners to begin working with Metro earlier, when the project is still being planned, and long before we get into heavy construction activity.
This early partnership can help to prepare designs that incorporate insights from construction and long-term operations and maintenance. This offers a life cycle approach to the project and prepares it for a possible public-private partnership. The PDA teams worked with information from Metro's feasibility study to offer their proposed alternatives using proven rail technologies.
We're now beginning environmental review. This is a formal, regulated process where Metro will study various aspects of each proposed alternative, including benefits, cost, feasibility, impacts, and any necessary mitigations.
There are several points of community input during the multi-year environmental process.
The Metro Board will select the locally preferred alternative or final route and mode for this project.
Let's look at the 6 alternatives we'll be studying in environmental review. They are identified with numbers.
All alternatives begin at the Van Nuys Metrolink station, which will provide connections to Metrolink trains, as well as the future Metro East San Fernando Valley Light Rail, Metro G Line, formerly known as the Orange Line, and end on the west side at the Metro E Line, formerly known as the Expo Line.
Alternatives 1, 2, and 3 are monorail.
Alternative 1 is fully aerial, traveling west before heading south along Sepulveda, with stops at the Metro G Line, Sepulveda Station, and Ventura Boulevard. Then it continues over the 405 through Sepulveda Pass with a stop at the Getty Center before continuing to the D Line Westwood VA station. It then heads south to a stop at Sepulveda Boulevard to end at the current E Line Sepulveda station. This alternative also includes an electric bus connection from the Westwood VA station to Veteran Avenue, Westwood Village, and the UCLA campus.
Alternative 2 follows the same route as Alternative 1, but with an automated people mover connection to the UCLA campus from the UCLA Westwood D-Line station. An automated people mover is a small-scale, driverless transit mode similar to what you might see at an airport.
Alternative 3 runs along the same aerial route through the Sepulveda Pass and goes underground after the Getty Center to provide an underground connection to the UCLA campus. From there, it connects to the UCLA Westwood D-Line station before returning to an aerial 405 route with a stop at Santa Monica Boulevard and ending at the E-Line Sepulveda station.
Alternatives 4, 5, and 6 are heavy rail.
Alternative 4 has an aerial segment along Sepulveda Boulevard before moving underground after Ventura Boulevard, where it continues underground for the rest of the route. This alternative would have underground stations at the UCLA campus, Westwood UCLA D-Line station, Santa Monica Boulevard, and the E-Line Sepulveda station.
Alternative 5 begins aerial at the Metrolink Van Nuys station and then moves underground along Sepulveda Boulevard for the rest of the route. It heads along Sepulveda with underground stations at Sherman Way, the Metro G-Line Sepulveda station, Ventura Boulevard, UCLA, the Westwood UCLA D-Line station, and Santa Monica Boulevard before ending at the E-Line Sepulveda station.
Alternative 6 is entirely underground. From Van Nuys Station, it heads south under Van Nuys Boulevard, stopping at the G-Line Van Nuys Station and Ventura Boulevard. From there, it continues with stops at the UCLA campus, Westwood UCLA D-Line Station, and Santa Monica Boulevard, before turning west to end at the E-Line Bundy Station.
We're now entering scoping, which is the first step in the environmental review process.
During this stage, we want to hear from you about what Metro should consider and study as we prepare the environmental impact report for the Sepulveda Transit Corridor.
Possible comments might include input on the destinations that you think are important to serve, your preferences for transit in this area, and questions or concerns you might have about project impacts.
We will be conducting virtual scoping meetings where we can hear your comments.
We will also take formal comments via mail, email, our website, or over the phone during the scoping period.
We appreciate your interest in this transformational project and look forward to hearing from you.
Excellent. And this video is currently available on our Metro YouTube channel. If you go to Metro Los Angeles, it's available both in English and Spanish. And we just posted those in the chat for those that wish to view that on their own time. With that, I'm now going to turn it over to my colleague, Jody Litvak, who will go over some of our introductions and the next part of our presentation. Jody.
Thank you, Matthew, and thank you everyone for being with us this evening. Before we get into the presentation, I want to take a moment to welcome our representatives from our elected officials' offices and our community organizations out there. We very much appreciate everybody's interest in this very high-profile project. And I will just say, if I get anything wrong, including the pronunciation of your name, I apologize. And if you are from one of those groups and we have not introduced you, please make sure to note it in the chat. I'll start off by welcoming Eric Bruins, who is the Deputy to Metro Director, and LA City Councilman Mike Bonin. We welcome Gabriela Marquez from Representative Tony Cardenas's office and Marco Enriquez from Senator Dianne Feinstein's office. With LA City, we've got Jay Greenstein from Councilman Paul Koretz's office. And from the City of West Hollywood, we have David Fenn. From our neighborhood groups, we have Irene Sandler from the Bel Air Beverly Crest Neighborhood Council, Jeffrey Hartsoe from the Sherman Oaks Neighborhood Council, Wendy Sue Rosen from the Brentwood Community Council, Steve Sand from the Westwood Community Council, Andrew Lewis and Furkan Yeltsin, both from the North Westwood Neighborhood Council, and Jeff Dunn from the Van Nuys Neighborhood Council. And also Sachi Cooper from the North Westwood Neighborhood Council. No, she's in, she's out, there we go, she's in, she's showing up on my list. Other key stakeholders that we have that we want to especially welcome, Dr. Tom Williams, the president of the Citizens Coalition for a Safe Community from Culver City, the Sierra Club Transportation Committee, and the LA 32 Neighborhood Council Land Use and Development Committee. Jennifer Poulakidis from UCLA, Stuart Waldman from the Valley Industry and Commerce Association, Hal Dash and Kobe King. Kobe, I think you're probably wearing your VICA hat, I don't know, and Hal Dash and Maricela Gomez, who I know are here, representatives for the PDA, for the different PDA partner teams. And we've just added Stacy Segarra Bollinger from the Sherman Oaks Neighborhood Council. So we have a lot of our VIPs here. If we can go to the next slide, and while we're doing that, I want to make a note that all of the links that you see posted in the chat are live. So if you can click on them, those will open up for you. And we will be sending all of them out in an email to you tomorrow. So if you don't get them tonight and you just want to pay attention or don't want to get caught in that, we will have to send those all out to you tomorrow. So what I want to note now is that Metro really has a plan to make it easier to get around Los Angeles. It includes creating better transit. This project is really working to provide a competitive transit option to get from the valley to the west side. There's a real topographical barrier in Los Angeles, those Santa Monica Mountains. Oh, and I see we have Meg Healy from CD4 has just joined us. Okay, I'll focus on that. If I didn't introduce you, I'll do it later on. Let's go on to the next slide, please. So our plan really works to weave together our efforts across our 4 areas, focusing on better transit, less congestion, complete streets, and access to opportunity. You'll hear us talk a lot throughout this and through other efforts that Metro is doing. All of these 4 priorities, and throughout everything, we are going to focus on equity and sustainability, and that really underpins everything we do. And with that, I will turn it over to David Meager. David, you can unmute yourself and turn on your camera and take it away from here. Thank you.
Thank you, Jody. Actually, we can go to the next slide here. You know, over the last 20 years, we've developed a network of projects that serve the valley and the west side of Los Angeles. The lines you see here are all been open since 2000. On the right, you see the red line, which is now our B line. This was actually our first project. It was a project that went to serve the valley, and it actually went through the Santa Monica Mountains. So this isn't the first time with the Sepulveda Pass that we're going through the mountains. We did it back in 2000, connecting Hollywood to Universal City in North Hollywood. And that line was actually doubled the ridership on the subway from downtown within a few months after it opened. It actually was able to divert a lot of people off of the current transit routes and out of their cars that travel through the Cahuenga Pass on the 101 freeway. Within about 5 years after that line opened for service, the Metro Orange line, which is now called the G line, opened from North Hollywood along through North Hollywood, through Valley Glen, into the Van Nuys area, crossing the 405 freeway, and into some of the West Valley communities as far out as Chatsworth and Canoga Park. That line is sort of a model for bus rapid transit. It was a former railroad right-of-way that opened with stations that serve those communities with rubber-tired transit solutions, and been operating since that time. Also in the valley, we currently have a project under construction, near to be under construction. It's on Van Nuys Boulevard, where we're looking to build a rail line from the Van Nuys station north past the Van Nuys Metrolink Amtrak station as far north as San Fernando Road, where it connects to the Antelope Valley, would connect to the Antelope Valley line at the Sylmar San Fernando station. So the valley now has these 3 lines that are currently either in service or under nearing construction. And then when you move south of the mountains, going down the Metro Expo line, or our E line, opened up in 2 phases in 2012 and 2015, which actually provide service from downtown past USC through some of the North University Park areas, past Crenshaw Boulevard, out through Cheviot Hills, Culver City, and out to Mar Vista and Santa Monica. And that line has been open now for the last 5 to 7 years in its full completed section. It was open in 2 pieces. So we have this network of projects that we're building. I don't want to omit speaking about the purple line also, which is now our D line under construction. And for those of you on the west side, I'm sure you're very well aware of this because we're building it in 3 phases. The first segment goes from Western out to La Cienega. Second phase from La Cienega to Century City, and then the third phase also under construction from Century City to Westwood and Wilshire and the VA hospital just west of the 405. That line is going to be opening up in 3 segments and will open before the Olympic Games is our goal, before 2027, so it can operate and serve the Olympic venues at UCLA and get people around Los Angeles a bit better for that deadline. So these segment lines are all opening up in a 5 to 8 to 10 year cycle. Sepulveda is the missing piece of this network. The 405, of course, is one of the most congested and heavily used freeways in the country. It's notorious for, even with the recent improvements to the 405, where we added capacity, improved the traffic lanes, and actually provided more capacity on the freeway. It still endures tremendous traffic congestion, even in the COVID period, during rush hour periods. And so we need relief on the 405 corridor to get people, through this area. And that's what this project is intended to do. So we can go to the next slide and talk a little bit about, we are not just doing this one thing to serve the Sepulveda Pass. The Sepulveda Pass has many different things that can be approached. Heavy rail, subway, or monorail is one solution. The highest capacity type of transit service can move people through the corridor very fast, independent of traffic on the freeways, and generally beating the traffic travel time on the freeways during rush hour periods by a significant degree. So in addition to the Purple Line, D-Line project that I just mentioned, we are also looking on the 405 at express lanes. And those of you that maybe travel on this 105 Century Freeway or on the I-10 Harbor Freeway or on the 10 Freeway out to San Gabriel, we have express lanes where people can buy a transponder and travel in lanes that are independent of the normal traffic, general traffic, congested traffic conditions for a fee that ranges from zero if you're in a carpool to a ranging fees that based on congestion, with the goal of trying to keep the lanes running at 45 miles an hour during the peak of the rush hour or at all times. So we're looking at that as an option. There's a separate study underway, and some of you may have been to our meetings that we've had on that project to look at whether the middle lanes of the freeway could be used as express lanes rather than mixed flow traffic lanes. That study's underway. And also the 405 extends, all the way up to the northeast San Fernando Valley and all as far south as Orange County. There's another study we're conducting with Caltrans looking at improvements all along the length of the 405 to look at ways that we can improve it further, keep flow going along that freeway in ways of making generally improvements to the existing facilities where there's bottlenecks, where there's access points that need improvements, different things that we can do to improve the flow throughout the 405. And then finally, what we're calling a traffic reduction study, looking at other ways of pricing or monitoring of traffic. Many of people do shortcuts through the Santa Monica Mountains to try to get to from the valley to the west side. Other ways that people are traveling and different means to travel. We're looking at just a number of different ways that we can look at arterial streets and other roadways that are handling regional traffic, but taking them through people's neighborhoods, through areas that are residential in nature, trying to get that traffic diverted and sent to other modes and other routes that actually can handle that capacity that aren't heavily residential or mountain communities. And so each of these projects that I just mentioned are going through their own environmental clearance planning process with this similar type of outreach effort as they reach the certain stages of development. And we'll be coordinating among all of them because the solution may be all of them, maybe a limited number of them, maybe only 1 or 2 of them. So we're looking at all of these options as ways to address this severe traffic bottleneck that we have in our network. I have one more slide too after this one, which I wanted to give a little bit of background to how we got to where we got on this current Sepulveda Pass project. And the genesis of all of this really was when the voters in 2016 approved Measure M, a sales tax measure in Los Angeles County, by over 71% of the voters who voted to tax themselves to provide highway and transit improvements, that with a number of projects that we've just shown you here in the West Side and the San Fernando Valley. And Sepulveda Transit Corridor was one of those major projects identified in that ballot measure that is being funded. So between 2017 and 2019, we did the initial study of this, which was looking at a wide range of different transit alternatives through the pass and destinations, starting points, stopping points in the valley, station locations, and best ways to connect into other networks. And that study came in with a range of 3 feasible heavy rail alternatives and 1 feasible monorail alternative as the recommendations from that study to be carried forward for development. In 2021, our board wanted to take a more, I guess you'd say, progressive view of this. They wanted to bring in, since this is a very complex corridor, it's hilly, it has terrain to deal with, it's got mountains, it has steep sides of those mountains that frame the 405 freeway. It's a difficult terrain to build in. So we actually opened this up to firms from all over the world and all over the country who we invited them to come in and give us their best thinking about what type of transit improvements they would suggest here based on their experiences working in other locations, as well as in Los Angeles. And so we narrowed that down in 2021. The board selected 2 teams, 2 PDA teams, pre-development agreement teams, to actually develop heavy rail and monorail alternatives in this corridor and give us their best solutions for what they thought would work, that we are now taking into this environmental review. And then this is what we consider the reasonable range of alternatives required, including a no project. What if we don't do anything in terms of changing this corridor? And we compare these alternative proposals to that no project alternative in the environmental study. And we have 6 rail alternatives now in the study, which we're going to talk a little bit more as we go forward. But at this point, I'd like to invite Kavita Mehta, our engineer and our lead for the PDA project studies, to give us a little bit of an overview of how that process is working. So I'll turn this over to Kavita now with the next slide.
Thank you, David. Good evening, everyone. I am Kavita Mehta, Deputy Executive Officer with Metro Program Management and Project Manager for the Sepulveda Pre-Development Agreements. So why are we doing PDAs or pre-development agreements for Sepulveda? We already understand the need for the project in this highly congested corridor. What we also know is that given the topography and the built environment, the design and construction of this project is also going to be very challenging. So with this PDA approach, we are involving contractors who build projects during the early planning and design phases, so we can make sure right from the beginning that we are designing something that can ultimately be constructed. We also anticipate that this early private sector involvement will bring about financial and technical innovation. The PDA approach allows us to think about cost effectiveness over the life of the project. So we're not just thinking about what is cost effective to design and construct, but what is cost effective to also operate and maintain in the long run. And lastly, it may allow for schedule acceleration. Next slide. These are the key milestones in the PDA process. It was back in July of 2019, Metro Board approved the PDA approach for this project. We issued the RFP and went through the evaluation process. And in March of last year, we awarded 2 contracts, one to LA SkyRail Express for their proposed monorail technology, and the second one to Sepulveda Transit Corridor Partners for their heavy rail technology. And also in August of last year, we issued the NTPs to both the PDA teams. Next slide. So Metro Program Management oversees both the PDA teams. So my team and I, we manage both the PDA teams, we review their work products, and we also coordinate with my colleagues in the planning department to provide the necessary input to the environmental process. This is again a little bit different. Metro program management usually gets involved during advanced design and construction phases. But here, since we are doing a PDA approach, a pre-development approach, program management is involved during this early planning and design phases, again, to make sure that we design something that can ultimately be constructed. We take a life cycle approach to the project, and we take advantage of the input and expertise the private sector partners can provide during these early phases that can help us during the later phases. So since coming on board in August of last year, the PDA teams have been working on the concepts that they submitted as part of their proposals to develop them further into distinct alternatives. And these are the alternatives that we are going to talk about more today. And from here on to, the PDA process will continue to be responsive to the environmental process. So we will take the comments that are provided as part of the scoping process and include it as part of, continue to refine the alternatives. And those refined alternatives would move forward into environmental analysis. And with that, I will hand it over to Jackie.
Kavita. Hi, everyone. I'm Jackie Sue, Senior Transportation Planner with Metro Planning. As we think about project goals and objectives, let's talk about current transit service. Next slide, thank you. The Sepulveda corridor provides an essential transportation link between the San Fernando Valley and the West Side. Over 400,000 people travel the corridor each weekday, but less than 2% do so by transit. Congestion on roads and freeways affects transit service as well as private vehicles, and the table on this slide provides some additional insight. These transit lines, which operate between the Valley and the West Side, have average speeds less than 20 miles per hour, and their on-time performance is in the 50% range. So because of these slow travel speeds and unreliable travel times, current transit service in the project corridor is not competitive with travel by car. Next slide. This leads us into a discussion of the purpose of the project. The purpose of the Sepulveda Transit Corridor project is to provide a high-quality transit service that effectively serves a large and growing travel market between the San Fernando Valley and the West Side. Next slide. The project goals and objectives will help guide the environmental process and identify the merits and challenges of each alternative. These goals and objectives might look familiar to you because they're informed by the goals and objectives from the feasibility study. Since that early planning study, we have updated these goals based on the work of the feasibility study and associated outreach, and we have also updated the goals to further emphasize equity and sustainability. The project has 6 goals. The first of these goals is to improve mobility, which means increasing transit frequency, decreasing travel time between the Valley and the West Side, increasing transit ridership, prioritizing connections to local points of interest and destinations, promoting efficiency of transfer experience between transit lines, and supporting non-automobile first last mile connections, which means walking, riding, or rolling to and from a transit station. The second goal is to improve accessibility and promote equity. This means improving access for equity-focused communities, which are communities in which a percentage of residents are low-income, people of color, and have no access to a vehicle. This goal also emphasizes identifying and pursuing investments that serve those with the greatest mobility needs. The third goal is to provide a cost-effective solution and to minimize risk, maximizing benefits to the public relative to cost, and maximizing potential eligibility for state and federal funding opportunities. Next slide. The fourth goal is to support community and economic development, which means increasing opportunity for economic growth around stations, minimizing physical barriers to communities, and prioritizing station placement and design that's consistent with community context, essentially being a good neighbor. The fifth goal is to protect environmental resources and support a sustainable transportation system, including reducing vehicle miles traveled, greenhouse gas emissions, and other air pollutants, in addition to addressing potential impacts to environmental resources. The sixth goal is to enhance resiliency, improving the resiliency of the metro system to natural disasters and climate change. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Peter to discuss project alternatives.
Thank you, Jackie.
Peter Carter, Senior Director in Metro Planning and the Project Manager for the Environmental Clearance of the Sepulveda Transit Corridor project. I wanted to start by thanking all of you for your interest in the project, those of you who are joining us today and taking time out of your evening to be part of our meeting. The Sepulveda Transit Corridor project proposes to construct and operate a dedicated piece of infrastructure across the Santa Monica Mountains between the valley and the west side. All of the alternatives that we're looking at today would have a northern terminus, which is to say an end of the line in the north near the Van Nuys Metrolink Amtrak station, and a southern terminus at the Metro E line in the south, the line formerly known as the Expo line. Next slide, please. The 6 alternatives that we're looking at have 3 different technologies: an automated monorail, an automated heavy rail, and a driver-operated heavy rail. And all 3 of these technologies have sufficient capacity to meet the expected needs of the project. Next slide, please. So alternative 1 is the first of 3 monorail alternatives, and all 3 of our monorail alternatives operate in what we call an aerial alignment that's up in the air, elevated within the 405 corridor. What's different about alternative 1 is the use of a bus connection to the UCLA area. The monorail portion of alternative 1 is 15.3 miles in length, and there's 8 stations, which starting from the south include a connection to the Metro E line, a station at Santa Monica Boulevard, a connection to the Metro D line, stations at the Getty Center, the US 101, the Metro G line, Sherman Way, and the Van Nuys Metrolink station. The bus connection that we mentioned happens at the Metro D line at the Westwood VA station. You'll also notice that we've marked the location of maintenance and storage facility sites associated with this alternative. Those are the yellow boxes that you see there. And the maintenance and storage facility site is a place where vehicles can be kept in a good working order and stored when they're not in use. So the maintenance and storage facility site for the monorail would be in the valley at the Metro G line Sepulveda station parking lots, and the maintenance and storage facility site for the electric bus associated with this alternative would be co-located at the UCLA Bruin bus facility on the west side. Alternative 2 is the second monorail alternative. And the differentiating feature of this alternative is the use of an automated people mover to access the UCLA area. The monorail portion of the line is 15.8 miles in length, and it includes the same 8 stations as alternative 1. The automated people mover connects to the monorail line at Wilshire Boulevard and Western. And if you look at the inset map there, you can see the monorail coming out of the 405 corridor to make that connection to the automated people mover. The maintenance and storage facility site for the monorail for alternative 2 is located in the same place as for alternative 1. The maintenance and storage facility site for the automated people mover would be located above the UCLA Bruin bus facility. Alternative 3 is the third monorail alternative. And the differentiating feature of alternative 3 is an underground connection to the UCLA campus. You'll notice that the alignment length for the monorail is a little bit longer, 16.2 miles. And that 1 extra station, bringing us to a total of 9, is a station on the UCLA campus. The underground portion of the line, you can see there's a different line type there, a little bit thicker dots, and that happens from just south of the Getty Center to just north of Wilshire Boulevard. The maintenance and storage facility site for the monorail for alternative 3 would be in the same location as the previous 2 alternatives. Alternative 4 is the first of 3 heavy rail alternatives. And the differentiating feature of alternative 4 is an aerial alignment along Sepulveda Boulevard in the valley. The alignment is 14 miles in length, and starting from the south, there are 4 underground stations, connections to the Metro E line, Santa Monica Boulevard, the Metro D line, and the UCLA campus. And on the other side of the Santa Monica Mountains, 4 aerial stations, elevated. So stations at Ventura Boulevard, the Metro G line, Sherman Way, and the Van Nuys Metrolink station. The maintenance and storage facility site for alternative 4 is located just to the west of Woodman Avenue and south of the Metrolink tracks. Alternative 5 is the second heavy rail alternative, And the differentiating feature of alternative 5 is an underground alignment along Sepulveda Boulevard in the valley. The alignment length is 14 miles, and it has the same 8 stations, 7 of which are underground. The Van Nuys Metrolink connection is an aerial station. The maintenance and storage facility site for alternative 5 is in the same location as alternative 4. Finally, alternative 6 is our third heavy rail alternative. What's different about alternative 6 is an underground alignment along Van Nuys Boulevard and a southern terminus, an end of the line in the south at Bundy on the Expo line. The length of this alignment is 12.6 miles, and there are 7 stations associated with the line. Connections to the Metro E line, the station at Santa Monica Boulevard, connection to the Metro D line, the UCLA campus, Ventura Boulevard, the Metro G line, and the Van Nuys Metrolink station. The maintenance and storage facility site for alternative 6 is located north of the Metrolink tracks and just to the east of Van Nuys Boulevard. Next slide, please. And as we heard David mention, we're also considering a no project alternative, and that means looking at all existing highway and transit services and facilities, as well as future transit and highway projects that are expected to be operational by 2045, with the exception of this one, the Sepulveda Transit Corridor project. Next slide, please. Next few slides take a look at our environmental process. And as we can see by the movement of this little yellow marker, having begun the scoping period, we have begun environmental review, but we're just at the beginning of that environmental review process, and there are several steps, further engineering and design that needs to happen before we even begin construction and get the line ready for operation. Next slide, please. So when we talk about the scoping period, what we're talking about is scoping an environmental document, specifically a document called the Draft Environmental Impact Report. There's going to be a lot of information in that document, everything from high-level summaries of the alternatives to more detailed conceptual engineering plans. The types of things that you'll find in those summaries include costs, benefits, and impacts associated with each of the alternatives. So things like construction costs, right-of-way costs, annual operating costs, as well as benefits, things like the ridership of each of the alternatives, the reduction in automobile miles traveled associated with those alternatives, as well as increased mobility for equity-focused communities. We'll also see environmental impacts, which is how we refer to the effect of the alternatives on their surrounding environment. And that's where you'll find things like the expected impacts resulting in property acquisition. A deeper dive into things like the conceptual engineering plans will show you track alignments, typical cross sections of the project, the layout of stations, as well as right-of-way impacts. The draft environmental impact report will also include environmental technical reports analyzing each of the alternatives. And we'll see a little bit more about that last item on the next slide. So the draft environmental impact report will be studying the potential effects of both construction and operation of the alternatives and evaluating measures to avoid, minimize, and mitigate their potential environmental impacts. And all the bulleted items here are examples of the potential impacts that we'll be studying, and these give you a sense of the depth and the breadth of those potential impacts that we'll be looking at. Next slide, please. So public participation is an integral part of environmental review. And from now until February 11th, I would encourage you to take a look again at the description of the alternatives, the associated maps, the project objectives that Jackie took us through, and let us know what you think. This is an opportunity for you to provide us feedback about the elements that are included in the alternatives, as well as the questions that you'd like to see answered as part of this environmental document that we'll be preparing. With that, I will turn things back over to Jody.
Okay, thanks again, everyone, for joining us. I just want to note, we also want to welcome Lisa Petrus from the Sherman Oaks Neighborhood Council and correct that Wendy Sue Rosen is actually with the Brentwood Residents Coalition. On that last point that Peter just ended the last slide with, where he said this is your opportunity to ask questions that should be answered as a part of the study. I want to acknowledge the frustration that occurs at this point in an environmental study. We are at the very beginning, and I know you have a lot of questions, and that not only are they not going to be answered tonight, but they're probably not going to be answered for a while. The purpose of the study is to do the analysis and to get the answers to those questions. So I just want to make sure everybody understands that, and also acknowledge that I know that that's frustrating. And that's the way this process goes. A little bit about the project outreach. We've been working to make sure everybody knows about it. We've done all of our legal notices with our notice of preparation to the public agency and our legal ads. We've used Metro's both English and Spanish language blogs. We've done targeted Spanish language media and social media. We have a website, a helpline, an email, our interactive story map, various links, if they have not already been posted, or even if they've already been posted in the chat, will be posted again. They will be sent out to you tomorrow as well. We have our frequently asked questions. We've already seen our project video. We've been sending e-blasts. I'm sure all of this is how many of you have come here, and we've posted things on buses, both on Metro buses and those of our sister agencies. Let's move on to our next slide, please. So there are many ways to provide comment. Again, the official scoping comment period ends on Friday, February 11th, a month from today. Again, this is your opportunity to not just tell us how you feel about the study and the alternatives, but let us know what are the questions that you want the study to answer. We have our online comment form. You can mail things to us. Peter's US snail mail address is on the right-hand side of the slide. You can email us. You can use our project hotline. We have an online comment form. All of those links are being posted. And we have one more scoping meeting a week from Saturday on January 22nd. I want to make a note, the recording of the first meeting in December is already up on the website. The recording of this meeting, while we will send out an email tomorrow, it takes us a few days to get the video posted, but this video will also be posted, and then after the meeting on the 22nd, we'll post that video as well. Let's go on to the next slide, please. So we're coming to the public scoping comment session. Please go to the next slide. So again, as we've said, the purpose of this is for you to tell us what you think about the purpose and objectives of the project, the alternatives under consideration, and the issues you want the environmental analysis to cover. What are your questions? The comments are going to be restricted to 2 minutes. We will double that if you need interpretation. As we've said, the Metro team will be listening to your comments and not answering the questions in this forum. They're sort of basic overall questions. We may post the answers in the chat, or if we can, but really the substance of the project itself is what the study will focus on. The more specific your comment can be, or the more specific your question can be, the better the technical teams can address it. Let's go on to the next slide, please. So again, as I said, this is a comment session only, and I understand the frustration. Before I talk through, explain how we're actually going to do the commenting function, well, actually, let's go ahead and start with that. You can click on the raise hand function if you'd like to provide a comment. The project staff, so go ahead and start doing that now, those of you who want to ask questions. The project staff will call on hands in the order they are received. You'll hear me ask for Stevie to announce that, and she'll be helping us out with that. When you are called on, please unmute your microphone when you're called upon, and then before providing your comment and before we start counting down your 2 minutes, please state your full name for the record and spell it if necessary. You'll see a countdown clock on the right-hand side here. If you are joining us by phone, there you go, that's what it's going to look like. She did that so quickly. If you are joining us by phone and not on the computer, and you wish to comment, press *9 to raise your hand. And then when you're called on, you can press *6 to unmute yourself. Again, if you need technical support for any reason, please call or text 213-600-9039. Stevie, do we have our first 3 names?
Yes, looks like we have about 16 hands raised.
Okay, so hold on. So I'm going to ask Stevie to say the first 3 names. If your name is the first name, don't unmute just yet because I want to say something after that. But Stevie, let us know the first 3 names so those people can get ready.
All right, the first 3 names are Stuart W, followed by Stephen S, and then Aaron H.
Okay, so we're always going to tell you who's speaking next and the 2 people behind them. So if you're number 2 or number 3, know that you're going to be moving up and you can get ready. I hope everybody understands that. Stevie, let's go ahead and take our first commenter. Okay, thank you so much. Thanks for hanging in there with us, everyone. Stevie, can you just go back to the last slide very quickly? There we go. Everyone, first of all, on behalf of everybody on the Metro team, Metro staff from all of our various departments, and our various consultants who are all part of the Metro team for this, we want to thank you for being with us tonight, hanging in there with us, listening to each other, everybody really following our code of conduct and being respectful. This is how to get your comments into us. Again, we are accepting comments through February 11th. We have another meeting coming up just like this one on Saturday, the 22nd. Is that correct? Yes, Saturday, the 22nd. I believe that's at 10 in the morning. And we will be sending out all the links from tonight's meeting to you tomorrow, and a few days after that, maybe by the end of this week or early next week, we'll send out the recording of today's meeting. The earlier meeting is already available. Please hang in there with us throughout this project. These projects take a really long time, but it's important we do these studies to get them as best as we can. And with that, everybody have a really lovely, wonderful rest of the evening and rest of the week. Thank you so much.